Hello and welcome to my first ever unmatched strategy guide. This is going to be for Bloody Mary. For those of you who don't know, Baked Goods recently released a video on Bloody Mary, and he had such a good Bloody Mary guide that I thought I would go ahead and come out with my own Bloody Mary guide. Anyway, so let's go ahead and hop right into it. Taylor did a great job of go ahead and laying out some strengths of Mary's as an aggressive fighter, some weaknesses as playing with a low hand count, and I thought I'd go ahead and write up some notes on his slanderous guide. One of the notes that he made was that Bloody Mary needs to prioritize a low hand count above all. Now, he did highlight that this is what he believes to be the best strategy. However, he believes that Bloody Mary has yet to be optimized. So he was just assuming this for the sake of making his guide easier to understand. However, I would go ahead and like to push back against that a little bit. He also, this wasn't necessarily expressed in his guide explicitly, but I believe it was kind of communicated there as well as on the Discord that a lot of people believe that Mary is slightly undertuned. So I'd like to go ahead and hop into that and maybe push back against that as well. And we also know that some people believe that she is weak, low tier scum. What would I like to say about all these things? Well, they are obviously just wrong. So first off, his first point was that Bloody Mary prioritizes a low hand above all. So let's go ahead and look at these scenarios. Taylor was great about laying out a number of these scenarios in his video. However, he didn't go into quite as much detail as I think I might here. And I also want to highlight if it's the start of your turn or the start of your opponent's turn. Now, one tricky part about this is what's your opponent? Are they able to maneuver and then attack you twice with, say, action gains as Bruce Lee or Yananga, or double attacks with Achilles and Sun Wukong? You know, there's a number of different questions as to how this exactly looks for the start of your turn versus the start of your opponent's turn. So I would like to go ahead and assume that if it's the start of your opponent's turn, a lot of times that you will not be being double attacked. Just by being somewhere else on the board, they would have to maneuver and attack and only basically attack you once that time. There are very few cards that also cost you extra cards, which are double attack, which is kind of optional, as well as ambushes, which are not optional, but very few fighters have them. So you don't have to worry about cards like that too often. So if it's the start of your turn and you have one card in hand, you are happy because you can go ahead and just double maneuver. It forces your opponent to have to come approach you, and you can run away to the other side of the board and put yourself with that magical 3 cards. If it's the start of your opponent's turn and you have one card in hand, you are very sad because basically if they run up and attack you, you either don't defend and take a lot of damage, or if you do have a defense card, you play it, but now you're not able to get that magical 3 number and you'll kind of be on the run a lot. If it's the start of your turn and you have 2 cards, I also believe you're sad. Yes, it's good to go ahead and double maneuver up to 4 cards, putting yourself in that magical spot, but it's kind of the same as 1 card, and honestly, I'd prefer to be at 1 card. So it just seems to me like it's better to be at 1 card. You will have more options with 2 cards, potentially getting, you know, some solid defenses in there. However, if you're at 1 card and you have any evades, and maybe an evade is your only defense, you're okay. If an evade is your only defense when you have 4 cards in hand, that's not okay, because if you do choose to play it, then you'll still be at 4 cards at the end of your turn. So I much prefer to be at 1 card when it's the start of my turn. Start of the opponent's turn, if I'm at 2 cards, I am happy. Now, why is this? It's because if my opponent has to maneuver and then attack me to get to me, hopefully I have a defense, and I will go down to 1 card, which then puts me at 1 card at the start of my turn, and it basically also kept your opponents at a lower hand count than what they could have potentially been if they had just double maneuvered. So I actually really like being at 2 cards at the start of my opponent's turn. Now, in order to get to 2 cards at the start of your opponent's turn, you'll most likely be adjacent to the opponent, so you might have to worry about being double attacked. So you just want to make sure you're managing that they're also at like 2, 1, or 3 cards in hand, so that if they do choose to do so, they'll be punished immediately after. 3 cards in my hand at the start of my turn, obviously very happy. 3 cards at the start of my opponent's turn, also very happy. 4 cards at the start of my turn, I'm actually going to go ahead and put this one as sad, because if my opponent has run away, if I want to maneuver and boost to get to them, I'm going to go ahead and put myself at, and then say attack, I'm going to go ahead and put myself down to 3 cards adjacent to them, with them able to, double attack me, which is not great. The only ways to avoid this is to use something that would draw me a card, which on offense for my second action is only broken glass. So there's not too much to do about that. So I much prefer having 4 cards in my hand at the start of an opponent's turn, just because normally your opponent won't attack you, because if they do attack you once and you go down to 3, they either run away and give you 3 actions, or they try and attack you again, during which you can either take it or you can defend with an evade, which is always a threat, and basically they don't get much out of it. They're 1 card lower than what they had, and you get 3 actions, which is really good. 5 cards in hand at the start of your turn. I'm going to go ahead and mark this as good. Now, why is this good? This is good over 4 cards, because if you go ahead and maneuver up to 6 cards, you boost down to 5, you go ahead and attack down to 4, and now you're at that magical 4 cards at the start of your opponent's turn. And this is great, because if you are at 5, it's oftentimes that you could be at 5 cards and your opponent is just 4 spaces, 5 spaces, even 6 spaces away. You can go ahead and maneuver and get to them. So I love being at 5 cards at the start of my turn. Also at the start of my opponent's turn. Now, why is this? Well, against ranged and melee fighters, if they have to come up and get to me, as long as I'm positioning myself correctly for ranged fighters, they will maneuver, then they'll attack me down to 4 cards in hand, but I will be within the range of hopefully 3 spaces away. So then I'm able to go ahead and maneuver, move adjacent to them, go from 4 cards up to 5, and attack them, and then I keep myself at 4 cards. Whatever attack card I did hopefully did some damage or knocked a card out of the opponent's hand, and then I'm at that magical 4 cards, most likely forcing them to double maneuver away, and I'm usually doing all right in the deck count at that point. So I do like it for 5 cards in that scenario. 6 cards at the start of my turn. I was trying to figure out a way to do this, and for 6 cards at the start of your turn, start of your opponent's turn, or 7 cards at the start of your turn, or at the start of your opponent's turn, I think you don't want to do this unless you have one of your 4 schemes. Once you have any of your 4 schemes, it really opens the door, and you are okay going at 6 to 7 cards. It can give you a 3rd action turn, which can heal you for 3 or deal 7. It can open your options for, stolen memories. If they end adjacent to you, you can go ahead and stolen memories. Take a look at what they have and then go from there. If you want to go play another Closer Than She Appears and get off, an Unfainted 7 or an Unfainted Ghostly Touch for that 3 healing, you've got a lot of options if you're at 6 and 7 cards, but only really when you have those schemes. So anyway, I don't think it's true to always prioritize a low hand above all. However, to Taylor's point, you really don't often want to sit at 6 or 7 cards except conditionally. However, 5 cards, as you can see from what I've highlighted here, is good in both scenarios, and 3 cards is also good in both scenarios. So since 5 cards is fairly high up there, and I don't see enough Bloody Mary players, I think, sit at 5 cards, I would go ahead and say that it's okay to go up into the hand count and not always prioritize a low hand count. For the second point that I highlighted, some people believe that Bloody Mary is slightly undertuned. So let's go ahead and just look at her raw damage output right at the beginning. She has 2 conditional 6s being Jump Scare. She has 2 conditional 7s being Speak 3 times. She has 3 double attacks. Now, if I play a double attack and you take it, it's 3 damage. Great. And I got no cards out of your hand. Now, if you defend with a 3 or lower, you will basically take, and then you don't defend the second attack, you will take 3 damage as well. Basically, if you defend with a 2, you will take 1 from the first combat, and then a 2 is coming back at you for the bonus attack. And if you take it undefended, you'll do 3. If you defend with a 4 or a 5, and then you take it, you're actually doing more damage, which is really good for the Bloody Mary player. So on average, it averages 3 damage for, as I mentioned, if you take it undefended or you only defend the first one. Or it is 2 cards if they choose to defend the first one and they choose to defend the second one. Most of the time you're not doing damage unless you did happen to get a printed 4 or 5 and then maybe a printed 3. The only time this really doesn't work is against anybody that has low value, printed values on their cards, but they're able to boost up in some way. Dr. Ellie Sattler has one of these cards, and Sun Wukong has one of these cards in Bewilderment. So I do want to highlight that there are some cards that get around this, but on average, it's either 3 damage or 2 cards. So I just wanted to highlight that. Then we have 2 1s that can easily be boosted to 4s and an average of 3 healing across the 2 of them. You can also boost it to 5s, but those do get rid of your double attacks since they are the only boost 4 values in your deck. So you do really have to be careful on what you boost. And boosting to a 4, yes, that may do 1 damage against an average defense of 3. Is that really worth it? I think the boosting it up to a 5 is more worth it, but as we mentioned, then that takes away from the double attack. So it's a big trade-off there that you have from your 1s. The big part about Ghostly Touch, however, is not only decreasing your hand size if you need it, if you're floating at that 6 or 7 cards, or you just need the healing and it is your third action. Bloody Mary also has 2 ambushes that average 3 damage and 1 card, or no damage and 2 cards. So if I go ahead and play an ambush and you take it undefended, it will deal 1 damage base, and then whatever card I pull in there, I'm adding the boost value to the attack value of my card. I'm assuming an average boost value of 2, so that'll go ahead and be hitting for a 3, and then it also removed 1 random card out of your hand. If you choose to defend, I will go ahead, and as long as it's not a feint, it will basically not do any damage, assuming an average defense of 3. However, it will grab another card out of your hand, so you'll lose 2 cards to my 1. Then we have Stolen Memories, which is her scheme, which will average either 2 damage or 1 card. Once again, looking at that average boost value of 2 damage. Stolen Memories allows Bloody Mary to look at the opponent's hand, choose any card in it, and the opposing fighter or player must either discard that card and deal that much discard that card, or keep the card and deal damage to their hero equal to the boost value of that card. That's why it averages 2 damage or gets rid of 1 card in the opponent's hand. This is really good in certain matchups against like Dracula with Beast Form, where it's a 4 value boost. So if you're able to catch Dracula with it in his hand, he either has to get rid of his best card or one of his best cards with bidding on the table. So he has to either get rid of one of his best cards or he has to take 4 damage, which is a large chunk of Dracula's health. So that is how Stolen Memories works. She has 3 Broken Glasses, which average 2 damage. Basically, you just match the opponent's value. You'll deal 2 damage to them. If they don't defend or they defend with a 1, you'll actually be doing a little bit more damage. But if you defend with it and they're attacking with a 5, a 6, or a 7, then you will not be dealing the 2 damage back to them. But on average, I would say it does 2 damage, probably on average around 4 damage throughout the course of the game, getting 2 of them to trigger and 1 of them not to. She also has 2 raw 4s with crazy movement effects, being Infinity Mirror, which lets her move herself or her opponent 4 spaces. Looking at this, that's a ton of good things going for Mary. So why do people say she's slightly undertuned? Well, looking into it, there's lots of conditional damage, right? Jump scare is pretty easy to play around as long as you end in the same zone that Bloody Mary is in currently. It's really hard for her to be able to trigger Jump Scare because Jump Scare jumps up to a 6 from a 3 if she shares no zones with the space she started in this turn. We also have speak 3 times, which can only become a 7 on your third action turn. So if it's your third action turn, that's the only time your opponent knows that they can be hit by a 7. Versus, for example, Sun Wukong can hit you with a Jingle Bong or a Ox Form at any point during the game. So, because of that, a lot of her damage is telegraphed. She also has her broken glasses, which have to match your value. So, if you're basically defending with a printed 5, which is very few fighters can currently do, or you're defending with a printed 0, or you are basically attacking with a 5, a 6, or a 7 that your opponent can't do anything about, you know for sure that you don't have to worry about that card in the Bloody Mary's deck. And so with a lot of those things, you can kind of begin to see if it's really easy to play around the opponent's play style, the better you're probably going to do in that match. Bloody Mary can also not block higher than a 4 without Mirror Image. Her highest defense caps out at a 4 in Infinity Mirror. Feints are iffy because, if I attack you with a Momentous Shift, if you defend with a 4, you'll take 1. If you defend with a Feint, you'll take 1. So it's kind of iffy, but most of the time, Feints, if they're attacking you with a printed 4, you'll take 2. If you defend with a 4, you'll take none. So it's kind of iffy there, but basically, assuming most circumstances, the highest thing you can block with is 4, except for Mirror Image, which basically copies the printed value of your opponent's card. So as long as they're not using a Momentous Shift or anything, and it's just a high printed value attack, for example, Bigfoot's Larger Than Life, the 6 value attack, it would basically negate that whole attack. However, if Bigfoot decided to attack you with Momentous Shift, then it becomes a 5 and you still take 2 over the top, which is not the worst thing, but it's really not the best thing either. So the Mirror Image is kind of a very situational defense card, which is kind of a bummer. And so it's just not as good as sometimes you'd like it to be, especially if the opponent has any type of card that they can boost over their printed value, which a lot of fighters do. And finally, one pro going for Mary, looking at all that, is we have lots of hand disruption. If you remember on the previous slide, there was a lot of stuff where she's either doing damage or knocking cards out of the opponent's hand. And that's Bloody Mary's whole game. As long as she can keep you at a low hand count and herself at a low hand count, she's going to win. If she can do that, she's going to win. No matter, I don't care who you are. I think she's going to win. And you'll see in tournament games, the opponent is just trying to build their hand size up so that they don't have to worry about that. If you are constantly attacking Mary and giving her her third action turns and playing at a low hand count like she likes, she's just getting way more actions than you throughout the course of the game, and you're going to lose. Assuming you play low the whole time and she's getting 3 actions for most of the game, then she's basically getting 50% more actions than you until you lose. So anyway, I just wanted to highlight that about Mary. That's definitely going for her. However, I think we can kind of see why people say she's slightly undertuned. However, I will still disagree with that because I believe she's not undertuned. And this has to do with the definition of undertuned. I think she wins the matchups she wins and she loses the matchups she loses. And there's not any matchups where it feels like she should win. But if she only had 1 to 2 more health, or she was only able to deal 1 to 2 more damage, she would have been able to win, and she should have been able to win. And the player played well, and the other player, whatever the situation. I believe that's what undertuned means, is that if she was just had a little bit higher values, then she would win matchups that are currently really close. And I think Bloody Mary has pretty polarizing matchups. In the matchups that she wins, I think she wins. In the matchups that she loses, I think she loses. And I really don't think any amount of tuning, at least reasonable amount of tuning, really shifts that at all. And so because that's the case, I don't really see that she's undertuned. If the argument is to go ahead and move her where a lot of more of her matchups are 50%, I see an argument there. However, in a lot of the matchups with feints and higher printed values and whatever it is, she still can struggle there. And I think if the opponent correctly predicts everything well, then they will win. Now, there's obviously arguments about that, where if Sun Wukong is playing against an opponent who correctly guesses every attack, then he's probably not winning that game. However, I think because of how easy it is for the opponent to play around Bloody Mary's not only jump scares, but also speak 3 times and healing, they can kind of play around it well. So, well, at least a lot better than Wukong. So I just wanted to highlight that. But I still don't think she's undertuned in the sense of how we define undertuned. Now, weak low tier scum, as some people have called her, I will push back against this as well, but this is the one that I actually agree with the most, except for the horrible language here of being weak tier scum. So anyway, in tourney, I would like to take Bloody Mary into Yananga, Robin, Dracula, Muldoon, and Little Red. If I have to play Mary into any of these matchups, assuming advantage, because I like to take Mary as follower, but even in disadvantage against most of these, I would be okay. That's why I'm okay taking Mary into these. And now we see Yananga, big one. This is using Battle of Legends Volume 2 meta, as I have played not enough Bloody Mary games into the Marvel fighters and to basically know where they fit on here. But you see Yananga and Little Red being very high tier fighters that I would take Bloody Mary into. We have Robin, Dracula, and Muldoon, which are just right below that, at least in my personal opinion. Muldoon or Robin a little higher than these other two with the Volume 2 meta. And if I'm okay taking Mary into those 5 fighters, she'll come up pretty often, and I think that's good. But that's only because of the Conquest and Volume 2 meta. I really do want to put an asterisk next to that, because this is only 5 of tons of fighters. So if we're looking at an average, then that kind of lowers her, just because if I take a random fighter and I take Bloody Mary, I'm probably not super happy with it. Me personally, I love playing Mary, and I love playing Mary against literally everyone. So I'm happy with it, but in terms of what I think my odds are going into it, I'm a little nervous. I would also like to say that in tournament, I would not be upset if my off game, meaning the game that I'm assuming I'm going to lose, but I'm playing Mary to go ahead and make sure that I can play Mary into whoever I was counter picking, is either Medusa or Sinbad. Now, Medusa fits this ranged meta, as you see, because I do believe Mary is very good into ranged fighters. And Medusa allows Mary to actually play in that 6 and 7 hand count place, and kind of force Medusa to have to really be careful about when she plays her discards, more so than any other fighter, I believe, in the game. Almost everybody else, if Medusa has the ability to play the discard and she knows that she's not getting baited with, say, a regroup or something that basically wastes the good 4 value of her hiss and slither, I think she almost always throws it. However, Bloody Mary, right, it's really dangerous for her to throw it at some times when it puts her, if I'm at 5 cards, not including my attack card, and you play a hiss and slither, you're putting me at 4 cards. So you probably don't want to do that, but if you don't do that, when are you going to get them off? And so I really do like Bloody Mary into Medusa, and I think she's got some stuff going for her there, which is saying a lot because Medusa is one of the big 3. Now, Sinbad, you might be thinking, why Sinbad? Sinbad builds up his power so quickly. Her defenses aren't great to deal with that. She only has 2 feints. If she feints a commanding impact, then she's taking 3, and one of her feints are gone. However, the reason that I like Bloody Mary into Sinbad is because Sinbad has to attack Mary. There are very few times where he just double maneuver and run away. And because of that, forced aggression Mary player is really good for the Mary player. Because if I sit at 4 cards and you can't just sit idly by and double maneuver and run away, and you have to approach me, you are giving me 3rd action turn. And then on my turn, I can go ahead and maneuver, and attack you. basically, then you can run away or you can attack me again, and then run away, giving me another third action turn, which, depending on the scenario, is really good for me. And Sinbad really has to do that just because of how much card draw he has. He really generally has to approach, and the few times I've played this one has felt so good for Mary just because Sinbad just can't sit back and, not do anything. So, anyway, do want to highlight that in the conquest meta, I really don't think she's weak low tier scum. But if we are just talking about I play Mary, you play anyone you like, she's probably going to be on the lower tier of just what are her odds against the whole cast. So in conclusion, just looking at Baked Goods video, I think it's very clear and conclusive that he's totally wrong, and instead of being baked goods, he should be expired goods because he has overstayed his welcome. But in all seriousness, Taylor, I think you did a really good job with your Bloody Mary guide. You touched a lot of great points. It was so in depth, and I think everybody loved it. I just do think that not highlighting or talking about potential high card counts and what that looks like really does kind of put Mary in a box that she shouldn't be in. But I really don't disagree too much with a lot of the conclusions you made. However, the ones that I did mention. But in all seriousness, let's go ahead and hop into my actual guide. Not that the previous things weren't serious, but I think you could tell that I was just poking fun at Taylor. So, Bloody Memories, for those of you following along with my previous video, I've got something called Everybody's Got a Thing, which just talks about certain card combinations that certain fighters like to get. And while we're waiting for me to get everything ready for the second one, I thought I'd go ahead and talk about Bloody Mary's The Thing. And this I have dubbed Bloody Memories. If you can get it, it's going to be 3 cards in hand, which for Bloody Mary is extremely good. Preferably an evade, but it actually really doesn't matter what the other card is in your hand. Stolen Memories and Out of the Mirror. These are the 2 cards you want to have in your hand. Now you also need your opponent to be 3 spaces away from you. Sometimes they're adjacent to you, putting you down to 3 cards, right? Because you were at 4, they just had to attack you. Because a lot of misconceptions are around just never give Mary a natural 3, and that's just not doable against a good Bloody Mary player. A good Bloody Mary player can always force you to give her at least 1 natural 3. If you don't believe me, then I challenge you to some Bloody Mary. Assuming they're 3 spaces away, you're going to go ahead and maneuver first. So you'll get 1 more card in your hand. You'll be at 4 cards. And you'll go next to the opponent and you'll play Stolen Memories. Now, this is the big part of the game. If you play Stolen Memories and you see a feint and it's a 2 value boost, you'll go ahead and choose it. If they discard the feint, you're golden. If they don't discard the feint, I recommend maybe even just maneuvering away, backing off, putting yourself at 4 cards, and you're kind of in an okay position. Depending on the rest of the cards in hand or whatever you drew off of that, you could be okay attacking with preferably not Out of the Mirror, but any 3 value in your hand, depending on what you drew, as I just mentioned. Because that will put you at that 2 cards on your opponent's turn. Let's say you didn't have an evade, they attack you down to 1. You're able to double maneuver, all those things we just talked about. But assuming they either don't have a feint or they do discard the feint, then on your third action, you're going to go ahead and play Out of the Mirror, which is an ambush. And if this is your third action, you draw 1 card. So what's great is it was your third action, so you're going to draw 1 card. So you're going to put yourself at 3. And if they discard a card to Stolen Memories and they defended Out of the Mirror, both of which are likely to happen, assuming you choose just a high boost value with Stolen Memories, then you're actually knocking 3 cards out of your opponent's hand, and you are still at 3 cards in hand. So at the start of your turn, you start with 3 cards. Let's say they had 7. Now you're at 3 cards, and they're at 4. So they probably have to attack you to try and knock it out, knock out your 3 actions, and you have an evade, which is great. Now, if you don't have an evade but you have a broken glass, that's also good because broken glass against a stationary opponent usually is likely to trigger. However, you also just use stolen memories, so you know exactly what's in their hand. So if you have a broken glass, you know if you can guarantee it to trigger or not. So this is just such a good combo. It's actually one of the best of Everybody's Got a Thing, in my opinion, and I've actually been able to land it probably through 4 or 5 times just normally, like throughout the course of the game, and 2 to 3 more times, like me specifically crafting my hand with these two and trying to get it to work and maybe forcing it a little too much. I lost the games where I was just kind of forcing it, uh, because when you're trying to force a specific 3 cards, sometimes you're not defending when you should. You're trying to keep the cards that you need and such. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend this, but this will happen in your Bloody Mary games. You'll start to notice it. Without a little bit of effort, you can get down to the 3 cards with this in hand, and you're in a really good spot. However, I would like to go ahead and talk about a variant of this as well. So it starts with the same 3 cards: Evade, Stolen Memories, and Out of the Mirror. But let's go ahead and say you're at high card count, as I mentioned with Stolen Memories. So here, all you really care about is Closer Than She Appears. When you're at a high card count against melee fighters or even ranged fighters, if you're using Trick of the Light to get close to them, basically you're going to end adjacent to the opponent a lot more often than when you're at 3 cards in hand or 4 cards in hand, because they're much more likely to attack you when you're at these high card counts. So what you can do is you can start with a Stolen Memories, and you go ahead and you take a look at their hand, and if they have a feint, you'll choose that. Great. Then, if they choose to keep it, maybe attack with an offensive Broken Glass. If they feint, great. They're out of that. Assuming they discard the feint or they don't have it, then you can go ahead and play Closer Than She Appears. Go ahead and get yourself 1 more card, putting you up to 5. Then attacking with Out of the Mirror or Speak 3 times. If you attack with Out of the Mirror, it basically does the exact same thing as the previous version. However, that extra card draw doesn't put you at that 3-card threshold again. That's why the previous version is so good. If you do have a Speak 3 times or a Ghostly Touch in your hand, it's also good to throw those out because you're looking either for damage or healing because of it. So just wanted to highlight Bloody Memories. It's probably one of the best combos in the game, and I would highly encourage people to watch out for it, especially against Yanenga, because that's one of Bloody Mary's best matchups. You can get it against her so much more often, and you can actually guarantee it to almost always cost her 3 cards, which is just nuts. All right, so other combos that I thought I would highlight, we have Stolen Memories, and these are kind of 2-card combos that I'm going to highlight. So we have Stolen Memories and literally any other card. Stolen Memories is just a nuts card. It's just so good. There are so many things you can do with looking at an opponent's hand, and it's not like Fiery Eyes, where they immediately draw a card and you no longer have knowledge. Stolen Memories will give you perfect hand knowledge and hopefully knock a card out of their hand or deal massive amounts of damage to your opponent. It's so good, and with almost every other card in her deck, she can pair it up with Stolen Memories into some good attack or just as a pass with whatever else she has in her hand. Really good card. Then we have Jump Scare, which, as I mentioned, is a conditional 6 attack. You want to be landing these, preferably both of them, because one of your Speak 3 times is going to get feinted. How can you easily set up jump scares? Well, with Infinity Mirrors. So if your opponent attacks you, you defended with Infinity Mirror, and you choose either to move them to 4 spaces somewhere close to you, where in 3 spaces you'll no longer be in the same zone, or you move yourself to make the exact same thing true, but just, you're moving yourself. This is one of the best ways to get Jump Scare to trigger. However, there's one more way, which is a little trickier, but that's Trick of the Light. So if you defend with Trick of the Light, you get to hop adjacent to the opponent, and in certain maps and on certain spaces on those maps, you might here adjacent to her might be in one zone, and then 3 spaces over, still adjacent to the opposing fighter, is in a different zone, and so you're able to get Jump Scare to trigger. However, it's definitely harder in order to get it to trigger. But offensively, this is also really good because if I attack you with a Trick of the Light, would be a 6 or 7 card combo. Then you could defend with skirmish or whatever, push me away, push yourself away. Then I get to hop adjacent to you, preferably in a different zone, and then smack you with that jump scare. That's fairly easy and common to do. So Infinity Mirror for defensively setting it up, and Trick of the Light for offensively setting it up. These are what I call combo breakers, specifically related to Bruce Lee, because Bruce Lee, basically, if you're still adjacent to him or you're giving him actions, or you're not canceling them, you're giving him actions, he's really happy. However, Infinity Mirror moves either of you away, and Feint cancels all effects. Why are these good? Well, for Bloody Mary, they're very good because if you're at 4 cards in hand and your opponent maneuvers and attacks you, each of these cards will guarantee you to be at 3 cards almost in all circumstances. The Feint for sure will guarantee it unless your opponent somehow has an extra action. And I believe some of the only fighters that really do that are like Dracula or Yananga with Master of the Hunt and, Mistform. But Feint will almost always guarantee you getting a 3rd action turn, which is great if they're attacking you into 4 cards as their 2nd action. If they're attacking you, with their 1st action, you go ahead and Feint, then you force them to have to, okay, do I have to attack again, but do I have the ammo to do so and do comfortably if they do happen to have that evade. Then we have Infinity Mirror, which the same thing, and it's even better to defend with first because if you're at 4 cards and they're at 4 cards, or whatever they are at, they attack you, you go ahead and push them away so where they're no longer able to attack you the 2nd time, and you're now at 2. Feint is great for a 2nd action attack, or from your opponent, and Infinity Mirror is great for a 1st action attack. Then I would just like to talk about Trick of the Light. I know some people have mentioned that Ghostly Touch is the worst card in Bloody Mary's deck. However, it helps her decrease her hand size, which sometimes she needs to get to those 5-card thresholds that we were just talking about to be in a really good spot. As well as it's healing you at least 3 in most games, sometimes 6 if you're lucky. I just don't understand how people can say that that's her worst card when Trick of the Light is on the table as well. And I think Ghostly Touch is just a really good card. But anyway, Trick of the Light, as we mentioned, you may place Bloody Mary in an empty space adjacent to the opposing fighter. So let's go ahead and just talk about the pros of this card. It helps navigate around beefy sidekicks. I found this useful when trying matchups against like Alice or Sinbad or Beowulf when there's kind of a corridor and they can block with one of their sidekicks and on the other side or far away kind of keep their hero. And Trick of the Light is great to basically, if they attack you, you can hop to the other side and hopefully, pursue the opponent, or offensively, you can attack and just hop on the other side. Maybe you got a Trick of the Light, or maybe, you just kind of need to get on the other side to get positional advantage. So Trick of the Light can be good for that. It also, as we mentioned earlier, helps trigger jump scare. It's great against ranged opponents because you basically just hop adjacent to them and kind of do whatever you want to the opponent, which is super good. It's a great throwaway card if anybody forces you to discard something. And it's even better boost fodder because it is a 3-value boost. So I would say it is still probably her worst card in her deck, and I'm almost always boosting with this card when I have it. Not because it never has its uses, but because 6 movement is just nuts. And so using this card, which isn't the best for 6 movement, is so much better than using like a double attack for 7 movement when I have a lot of value that I could get out of that. So I do want to highlight that there are a lot of uses of Trick of the Light that weren't obvious to me at first, and I've started using it so much more tactfully, and especially at high hand counts. This card becomes so much better. It's so bad in low hand count. It's pretty good in high hand counts for triggering those jump scares or just needing the boost whatever it is, really, really decent card now that I've played with it more. So final thoughts. I know that was a long video, just kind of going through everything. I just wanted to highlight that I think Bloody Mary is a really good fighter. Where is she on the tier list? I think 0 Scare 12 put her exactly where she is on the tier list. If not one too low, maybe she should be at the top, one row above at the very bottom. I could see it kind of going either way for different arguments. We'll need to see what Marvel fighters give her certain matchups. But one, Bloody Mary is extremely difficult to play. As I mentioned, all the stuff that I highlighted here came through hours and hours and hours of Bloody Mary play. And I really still feel like there's a lot to learn. But I learned how to use Trick of the Light well. I used what's good card counts to put myself at. I've learned how to play high card count Mary against specific matchups like Medusa and others. There's so much to her, and she's so good about tempo, right? Like the whole game with Bloody Mary, and if you learn one thing from this video, I want it to be this. Bloody Mary either cares about damage or she either cares about getting cards out of your hand. That's it. She really doesn't care about getting cards out of your hand and doing damage over the top. Yes, she has jump scare. Yes, she has speak through times, and yes, she has broken glass, which do those things. But as we mentioned, those are all conditional. So if your opponent's playing around those, it's really hard to do that well. So what you're trying to do is just 2-for-1s this whole time and force your opponent to basically be running away the whole game. Or when they do choose to aggress, you punish them hard with a third action turn immediately after, increasing your health pool, smacking them for a 7, or getting 3 cards out of their hand and doing it again the exact next turn. So anyway, thank you for watching and sticking with me, and I would just like to ask that you go ahead and watch Taylor's video and go ahead and like and subscribe his videos. I think that you would gain a lot more if you watched both of these videos. And he's just, he's so knowledgeable about this game as shown by his tournament placings. So I just want to highlight that and recommend checking that out. All right. Thanks. And remember, Conchu doesn't take fatigue damage.